The laughter started cruel and sharp in the grocery store lot. An old man fumbled with his scooter, cheeks burning under the jeers. What no one expected was the sound that soon shook the pavement. 50 Harleys rolling in, chrome flashing, loyalty roaring louder than shame. Before we start this story, tell us, where in the world are you watching from? Also, please subscribe to the channel. It will help us to bring you more inspiring stories every day. The town of Maple Rock was small, its streets cracked from winters and summers that always seemed too long. On those streets rode Walter Briggs, 74, a widower with a crooked back and a scooter that buzzed more than it roared. Once he'd been a truck driver, known for hauling steel across the state. But now his body carried the weight of years and loneliness. Walter didn't care much what people thought, until they started laughing. At the grocery store, teenagers pointed and mocked. "Look at Grandpa's toy bike," one shouted, snickering as Walter's hands fumbled on the handlebars. He kept his head low, trying to escape the sting. Inside, he bought bread and milk, his shoulders hunched. But outside, the same group waited, circling him like wolves. "Where's the rest of your gang, old man?" Walter's throat tightened. He wished he could vanish, but fate had other plans, and they were about to roar into that parking lot. Walter pushed his cart toward the scooter, heart pounding. One teen darted forward, snatching the bread from his bag and tossing it to another. Laughter exploded. Walter's cheeks burned red as he whispered, "Please, just let me be." They ignored him, chanting "Scooter Boy" louder, circling closer. Walter's hands trembled, his dignity stripped in front of strangers who pretended not to see. Then the ground began to shake. A low rumble rolled over the lot, steady, growing, unstoppable. The laughter faltered as headlights cut across the pavement. One by one, Harleys pulled in, chrome flashing under the afternoon sun. Leather vests marked with red and white patches gleamed. At the front was Duke Iron Hand Mallory, his jaw like stone, his eyes hidden behind dark shades. Engines idled like thunderclouds ready to break. Iron Hand dismounted, boots echoing on asphalt, and stood between Walter and the sneering boys. His voice was calm, cold steel. "You done here?" The lot went silent. The teens shifted, bravado slipping under the weight of 50 stares. Iron Hand tilted his head, one eyebrow lifting. "Didn't sound like respect to me." The tallest boy stammered, "We were just joking." The angels behind him chuckled, not with humor, but with warning. Walter's hands shook against his scooter grips, stunned by the wall of leather and chrome. Iron Hand turned slightly, his voice softer when it reached Walter. "You all right, sir?" Walter swallowed hard. "Just tired of being laughed at." His words cracked, filled with years of swallowed shame. Iron Hand nodded once, then faced the boys again. "Mock him again and you mock us." Engines revved in unison, the sound deafening, rattling windows across the lot. The teens scattered, sneakers squealing as they fled into the distance. Walter blinked, disbelief mixing with relief. For the first time in years, someone had stood beside him. Iron Hand clapped a hand on his shoulder. "No man rides alone." "Not tonight," Walter tried to protest. "I don't need an escort." Iron Hand's grip was steady but kind. "A man deserves respect on his ride, no matter the wheels." He raised his hand and 50 engines roared alive. Shoppers spilled onto the sidewalks, phones raised as the convoy formed around Walter's scooter. At first, Walter's chest burned with embarrassment, until he saw it differently. To the outside world, it looked like a king's procession, leather and steel circling tight around a frail man on a buzzing scooter. Walter sat straighter, the corners of his mouth twitching into the faintest smile. The angels flanked him down Maple Rock's main street, the rumble shaking windows turning jeers into awe. Children waved from porches, wide-eyed. Drivers pulled over, tipping their hats. Walter felt his dignity return with each passing block. He wasn't the joke anymore. He was the man leading 50 Harleys through the heart of town. And no one dared laugh now. The convoy stopped at Walter's modest house on Oak Ridge Lane. His scooter sputtered to silence, surrounded by a choir of idling Harleys. Neighbors peeked from curtains, jaws slack. Iron Hand steadied Walter as he dismounted, voice firm but kind. "Any time you ride, we ride." Walter's throat tightened. "Why me?" Iron Hand shrugged. "Because respect is owed, not earned by wheels. And because one day that could be us." Walter's eyes burned as he nodded. From the window, Mrs. Callahan, his widowed neighbor, pressed her hand to her mouth, tears streaming. For years, Walter had lived small, shrunken by time and grief. Tonight, leather giants had lifted him higher than his legs ever could. As the angels roared off, their thunder carrying into the distance, Walter stood tall on his porch, Scooter beside him. He realized something he hadn't in years. Dignity isn't lost with age. Sometimes it just waits for the right brothers to help carry it home. By morning, Maple Rock was buzzing. At the diner, voices carried between booths. 50 angels escorting an old man on a scooter, one said, shaking his head. Another smirked. "What's next, training wheels?" Yet not everyone mocked. A trucker at the counter muttered, "Looked like respect to me." Walter sat alone at a corner table, his coffee cooling, shame and gratitude battling in his chest. He never wanted to be a spectacle. He just wanted to be left in peace. But when Iron Hand pushed through the door, silence fell. He sat across from Walter without asking. "You think you didn't deserve that ride, don't you?" Walter lowered his eyes. "I'm nobody, son. Just an old man on a scooter." Iron Hand leaned in, voice steady. "You're a man who kept riding when life knocked you down. That's not nothing. That's everything." Walter's hands trembled, but in his chest, something flickered. A spark he thought had long gone cold. That evening, Walter wheeled his scooter into the driveway, only to find a crude note pinned to his door. "Clown parade. Stay off the road." His shoulders slumped. For a moment, the loneliness of his little house swallowed him. But before despair took root, the growl of engines filled the lane. A half-dozen Harleys pulled up, their headlights bathing the note in white. Iron Hand plucked it from the door, ripped it in half and tossed it aside. "Jealous cowards," he muttered. Another biker, broad-shouldered and quiet, patted Walter's back. "Ignore 'em. You got family now." Walter's throat tightened. "I don't know if I deserve that." Iron Hand's gaze softened. "Deserve's got nothing to do with it. You stood there alone while they laughed. That makes you one of us." Walter's scooter sputtered as if in agreement, and for the first time he chuckled. The sound startled him. It had been so long since he'd laughed that it felt like rediscovering himself. Sunday morning, Walter rolled to church on his scooter, spine straighter than usual. Whispers rose from the congregation as he parked beside the steps. "There's the Angels mascot," someone muttered. But when the service ended, children ran ahead to touch his scooter, their laughter innocent, free of scorn. A little girl asked shyly, "Did you really ride with all those bikers?" Walter smiled, pride softening his wrinkles. "I sure did." For once the laughter around him wasn't cruel, it was amazed. Later, outside the churchyard, a group of teens lingered, the same ones from the grocery lot. They sneered but said nothing, shrinking when 2 Harleys rumbled past, nodding at Walter like kin. The teens scattered. Walter exhaled, his hands steady on the grips. He realized then that fear had shifted. It wasn't his anymore. It belonged to those who mocked him. And for the first time in years, he rode home not as a target, but as a man others now thought twice about crossing. Still, doubt lingered. Late that night, Walter sat at his kitchen table staring at an old photo, himself as a young trucker, strong-armed, standing beside his rig. He whispered to the silence, "Where'd that man go?" A knock startled him. Opening the door, he found Iron Hand with 2 riders carrying bags of groceries. "You shouldn't have to eat alone," Iron Hand said simply, setting them on the counter. Walter's eyes burned. "Why do you keep coming back?" Iron Hand's expression softened. "Because we see ourselves in you. Someday these hands," he held up his scarred knuckles, "won't grip a throttle either. But until then we ride for brothers who can't." Walter swallowed hard, the weight of their loyalty pressing deep. He realized then that their visits weren't charity. They were reflection. His scooter, his struggle, his persistence. It was the mirror of what they feared and what they honored. He wasn't their mascot. He was their reminder. The turning point came the next week. Walter stopped at the same grocery store where the jeers began. As he rolled up, whispers stirred. A young man snickered. "Scooter boy's back." But before Walter could lower his head, another voice cut sharp. A woman at the door snapped, "Show some respect. He rides with the angels." The boy fell silent, his face paling. Walter froze, stunned. Respect, not pity, had spoken for him. Inside, shoppers nodded politely, some even smiling. At checkout, the clerk quietly bagged his groceries for free. Walter wheeled out to find 3 Harleys waiting, engines purring. Iron Hand wasn't among them, but the message was clear: family doesn't fade. Walter gripped his handlebars tighter, chest swelling with something he hadn't felt in years, dignity that didn't come from hiding, but from standing tall. As the convoy rolled beside his scooter, heads turned, not to laugh, but to honor. And for once, Walter didn't wish to disappear. He wished to ride forever. Spring rain drizzled over Maple Rock as Walter rode his scooter home from the pharmacy. His jacket was soaked, his groceries rattling in the basket. At the corner, a pickup swerved, splashing muddy water across him. Laughter spilled from inside the truck. Walter froze, teenagers again, the same group that mocked him before, still buzzing around on that toy. One jeered, leaning out the window. Anger sparked, but Walter gripped his handlebars and pressed forward. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't shrink either. The truck screeched ahead, cutting him off. Walter's chest tightened. Rain blurred his vision. Then came a familiar rumble. Out of the mist, a dozen Harleys appeared, lights blazing. They surrounded Walter's scooter, forming a circle in the rain. The pickup driver's smirk vanished as Iron Hand pulled alongside, his voice thunder over the storm. "Enough!" The teens sped off, tires squealing. Walter sat trembling, but he didn't feel small anymore. He felt carried by thunder. The next morning, the story spread across Maple Rock like fire. Bikers shielded him again, someone muttered at the cafe. This time, though, the tone had changed. Respect crept into voices where Mockery once lived. Still, not everyone approved. At the town hall, council members grumbled about trouble and intimidation. Walter, sitting quietly in the back, listened as people argued over his dignity like it was a burden. His hands clenched. For decades he'd worked, paid taxes, raised kids. And now at 74 he was debated like he was nothing. When the meeting ended, Iron Hand was waiting outside. "Heard it," he said simply. Walter's voice cracked. "Why does it take all of you to make them see me?" Iron Hand leaned close. "Because they needed a reminder, and you gave it to them." Walter blinked, stunned. He hadn't thought of himself as giving anyone anything. But maybe his quiet endurance was stronger than he realized. 2 days later, Walter parked outside the diner. He hesitated before going in, stomach tight. Inside, a group of men snickered. "Scooter parade," one said. Walter's chest clenched, but this time he didn't back out. He stepped inside, his scooter helmet tucked under his arm. "Yeah," Walter said, voice steady. "That was me, and I'm proud of it." The laughter faltered. Before anyone could reply, the windows rattled. Harleys rolled up, filling the street outside. Iron Hand and his crew stepped in, silent but commanding. They didn't speak for Walter. They didn't need to. His words had already landed. The room fell quiet, the air thick with unease and respect. Walter's hands shook, but his chin stayed high. For the first time in years, he wasn't hiding from Mockery. He was facing it. And behind him, leather and steel stood as proof that dignity isn't taken by jeers. It's reclaimed by courage. The final test came on a Saturday during Maple Rock's annual street fair. Families crowded Main Street. Vendors filled the sidewalks and music echoed from the stage. Walter rolled his scooter through, determined to enjoy the day. But the same teens appeared, emboldened by the crowd. "Here he comes," one jeered. "Grandpa Thunder." Laughter rippled, sharp, familiar. Walter froze, shame tightening. Then the laughter faltered. A wall of chrome rolled in from both ends of Main Street. 50 Harleys filled the square, their engines shaking windows. The crowd fell silent as Iron Hand dismounted, standing beside Walter. His voice boomed, clear and steady. "You laugh at him, you laugh at us. And we don't forget." The angels lined up behind Walter's scooter, chrome glinting in the sun. The crowd shifted uneasily. Then a child began to clap. Another joined. Soon the square filled with applause. Walter's chest swelled, tears burning his eyes. This time the whole town had seen the truth. The applause grew louder, echoing off storefronts. Walter sat straighter on his scooter, the shame of years falling away. For once he wasn't invisible. He was honored. The teens shrank into the crowd, faces pale. Iron Hand leaned toward Walter, his voice low. "You didn't need us this time." "They saw you." Walter's throat tightened. "I never thought I'd live to feel this." The angels revved their engines, a thunderous salute that rattled the square. Walter raised his helmet slightly, almost like a crown. The crowd's clapping rose higher, not just for the bikers, but for him. He realized then that his scooter, mocked as weakness, had become something else entirely, a symbol of endurance. As the angels rolled out, Walter followed at the front, his little engine buzzing proudly within a sea of thunder. And for the first time in his 74 years, Maple Rock didn't see him as less. They saw him as a rider. The applause from the street fair lingered in Maple Rock for days. At the cafe, people spoke softer when Walter passed. Some tipped their hats. Others avoided his gaze, uneasy with guilt. Walter didn't crave their pity, only peace. One evening, Iron Hand knocked, helmet tucked under his arm. "Rally this weekend," he said. "We want you there," Walter chuckled. "On my scooter." Iron Hand grinned. "Front of the line." Walter hesitated, but something inside him whispered yes. That Saturday, the streets filled with hundreds of bikes, leather vests stretching for blocks. Walter rode at the very front, his buzzing scooter swallowed in a sea of thunder. The image was absurd yet powerful. Crowds lined the road, not laughing this time, but clapping, waving, saluting. Walter's chest swelled. His scooter wasn't shame anymore. It was courage in its purest form. And for the first time in decades, he felt proud to ride. After the rally, Walter parked outside his home to find children waiting at the curb. "Mr. Briggs, can we see your scooter?" they asked eagerly. Walter laughed, heart swelling. "Sure can." Tiny hands touched the handlebars, eyes wide with wonder. A boy whispered, "You're brave." Walter's throat tightened. He realized then that his ride had become more than survival. It had become a symbol. That night, he polished the scooter until it gleamed. Every scratch a story, every dent a badge. Iron Hand stopped by, watching quietly. "You changed something out there," he said. Walter shook his head. "All I did was ride." Iron Hand smiled faintly. "That's all it ever takes." Walter gazed at the scooter, no longer seeing frailty. He saw endurance, he saw dignity, and he saw the truth, that every man, no matter how small his wheels, could leave a thunder behind him if he dared to keep moving forward. Summer evenings grew long, and Walter began to ride further, past the mill, down winding roads, through the hills, sometimes alone, sometimes flanked by Harleys. The scooter buzzed, the engines thundered, and together they made music Maple Rock would never forget. One evening, Walter stopped at the overlook above town. Iron Hand joined him, both men gazing at the lights below. "Funny thing," Walter said quietly. "All my life I thought getting smaller was just what age does. But maybe it's what shame does." Iron Hand nodded. "And you burned that out of you." The two men stood in silence, the hum of engines below like a heartbeat. Walter realized he wasn't just living longer than expected. He was living fuller, and the town, whether it admitted it or not, was living differently too. People no longer mocked as freely. Children no longer sneered. Dignity had been redefined on two mismatched wheels. One buzzing scooter, 50 Harleys. The final shift came quietly. At the grocery store, Walter parked his scooter in the same spot where the laughter began. This time, no jeers. Instead, the clerk came out with his bags already packed. "On the house, Mr. Briggs," she said softly. A man who once mocked him tipped his cap. Walter blinked, humbled. When he rode off, he wasn't followed by laughter. He was followed by respect. That evening, Iron Hand placed a small patch in Walter's hand. "Honorary brother," it read. Walter's vision blurred as he traced the stitching. "I never thought I'd matter like this again," he whispered. Iron Hand gripped his shoulder. "You always mattered. The world just needed reminding." Walter placed the patch in his jacket pocket close to his heart. He wasn't a biker, not really, but he had something just as strong now. A family that rumbled on steel and carried his name in thunder. On a golden autumn evening, Walter rode home with the angels. The sun sank low, painting the sky orange and red. His scooter buzzed steadily at the front, surrounded by 50 Harleys roaring like a hymn. Tabors came out, not to laugh, but to wave, to smile, to honor. Children clapped as he passed, shouting, "Go, Mr. Briggs!" Walter's eyes burned, his chest light as air. When they reached Oak Ridge Lane, the bikers cut their engines, leaving silence thick with meaning. Iron Hand leaned close. "From the day you rode alone to this day you ride with us. You've never been small. You've been brave." Walter's scooter sputtered as he parked, but his dignity glowed brighter than ever. As the angels thundered off into the horizon, Walter stood on his porch, helmet under his arm. He was no longer the man mocked in a parking lot. He was a rider who had taught a town the true sound of respect. Respect isn't about the size of your ride. It's about the courage to keep moving.